Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gina Smrecki. I am the events manager at Nuspire, and I'll be your host for today's live session. Today's webinar is always a popular topic as we look at Nuspire's threat findings from last quarter and have our analysts share the current trends in cybercrime. The full threat landscape report did go live this morning and is now available to download from our website. I'll go ahead and share that link in the chat for you if you're interested in taking a look at the full threat landscape report for last quarter. If you have questions during the presentation today, please submit them in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. We will try and leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. And just so you know, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to watch the recording of this session. So at this time, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today, Josh Smith and Justin Hurd. Josh is a cyber threat analyst at Nuspire who works closely in organizational threat landscapes, curating threat intelligence, and authoring Nuspire's quarterly threat landscape report. Josh is currently pursuing his master's degree in cybersecurity technology. Previously, he served with the U.S. Navy as an operations specialist with 14 years of service. Josh has been quoted in Forbes, CSO Online, Channel Futures, Dark Reading, and others. And Justin is our Director of Threat Intel and Hunting. He works to develop and deliver intelligence at Nuspire. Justin has over 13 years of experience in cybersecurity and has developed methodologies and tools for industry-based threat modeling. Justin previously worked 6 years for a defense contractor as a security engineer and network administrator. And now I'll turn it over to Josh and Justin.
Gina, thank you very much for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're at in the world. Thanks for joining us very much. As we get started with this, let's go ahead and cover just what is our agenda for the day. We're going to go through our methodology and overview, which Justin will kick off this for us. Then we're going to roll into our 3 different data sets that we look at, malware, botnet, and exploits for Q2. At the end of each one of those data sets will be a mitigations and recommendations. And we're going to also take a look at a highlighted industry. This time around this quarter, we're looking at the financial sector. We'll wrap everything up with the conclusions and recommendations again, and open up the floor for Q&A. And so I'm going to turn this over to Justin for methodology and overview.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Josh. So before we get started, we just want to talk a little bit about the data itself, how we collect it, what it is, and what we're doing with it. Basically, the data we're going to be looking at today is a collection of information that we've collected through incidents that we've worked through our SIM solutions with all of our customers, as well as reputable third-party open source intelligence that we collect in order to process this information and build some trends and kind of understand what's going on in the threat landscape. This is a really important process in the intelligence lifecycle, and it's just getting prepared. So this is the planning side of it, where we're understanding where things are going, so we can put things in place in order to help mitigate attacks in the future. So this is just a way for us to understand where those trends are going. And then ultimately, we're going to disseminate that information. This is a perfect example of that. The quarterly threat report is exactly this, us collecting all that information, processing it for you, and then bringing it to you in a way that you can use it to help secure your organization a little bit better. So this is a great example of some strategic intelligence for us to get started here.
As we jump into our first section, which will be malware, we actually saw about a 45% decrease in detections compared against our Q1 data. We still saw roughly 2 million detections, and really we have been seeing kind of an overall decrease in this activity ever since Microsoft's efforts to block malicious use of different types of Office files. With that being said, JavaScript variants still continue to dominate what we see as initial loaders for as seen in Q1, and again, that trend is carried over into Q2. This is likely, again, due to a lot of Microsoft's activities in blocking a lot of these different things that these threat actors utilized. I don't think anyone here who's been around in security for too long knew that, the malicious Word files and Excel files with macros embedded were a very popular method of phishing. As that has been taken away from these threat actors, they shifted over to OneNote. Microsoft was really quick to respond to that. And it seems like right now, JavaScript seems to be the preferred flavor at this time. So continue to remain vigilant when you see these sorts of things falling into your mailboxes. Also keep an eye out for new developing tactics trends. We certainly will be, because JavaScript isn't a preferred thing for these threat actors, as it's not superly common used within environments. Because of that too, if your organization doesn't use JavaScript, it's probably a really good idea to go ahead and block those types of functions within your email firewall to prevent those things from ever reaching your mailboxes. Another thing we really wanted to start digging into here is ransomware gangs and the activity that we see from these sorts of folks. When we take a look specifically at Q1 to Q2, we saw an 18% increase in ransomware extortion publications. What a ransomware extortion publication is versus just an attack, that's a successful attack from a ransomware operator. Because after they've gone ahead, they've attacked an organization's network, they've exfiltrated information, and they have now published proof of that attack on their extortion websites to try to apply that extra pressure to get an organization to pay. So as we take a look at that, Lockbit remains our current top operators. We look at Q2 as they were in Q1 as well, publishing over 300 different extortions. And then if we take also another look at a growing organization, if you will, is Clop Ransomware. Clop Ransomware is always kind of made a little bit of noise, but they really made a big surge of activity in Q2, specifically involving the move it transfer vulnerability that was announced in Q2. This ransomware gang is a driving operator of global trends with their levels of activities, being one of the largest phishing and spam distributors worldwide. You can see from that graph that as soon as the move and transfer vulnerability was announced, they very quickly took advantage of it, and their extortion publications jumped by 65%. They're very opportunistic and continue to expect to see this name in headlines, especially when you see the big major widespread vulnerabilities get announced.
So on to the malware mitigations and response. So as Josh was mentioning, threat actors are always looking for new tactics and techniques to attack. And so our best defense is to first understand what they're attacking, what different vulnerabilities they're using, what the tactics and techniques they're using to deliver this malware so we can stop it on initial access if possible. Some of the ways that we can mitigate and respond to these things are endpoint protection platforms. One thing we don't really talk about too much, or we haven't in previous, is the response aspect of it. These EDR or endpoint protections platforms helps engineers respond to alerts better, quicker, with more accuracy, so we can be a little bit more granular at the type of data we're looking at, since it's at the endpoint level. So it's really important to have some of these things deployed just from a response aspect to be able to have the data to figure out what's going on in the environment and potentially detect it and stop it before it happens. Network segregation, always a great practice to have, keeping things on their own segments, things that don't need to talk to other devices, not allowing those connections. And then ultimately, the last one here is cybersecurity awareness training, understanding that threat actors are using phishing, emails, at one point the malicious Word documents, the OneNote tactic, training your employees to know what to look for is really helpful as well from a mitigation standpoint.
As we shift over into the botnet section, we saw roughly over 1 million events, which led to a 15% increase in activity when we compare that against our Q1 numbers. Looking at the top 5 botnets, Torpig MeBrute still remains as the top witnessed botnet. followed by the net support rat botnet and fatal rat. Fatal rat and net support were really some big noise makers in Q1, and they've continued that trend throughout Q2. TortBig continues to dominate the space. But when you actually look at the numbers as far as the activity, there was really only about a 1% increase when we compare that against Q1. There actually still remains to show up in bursts, as we've seen, where it appears they launch a campaign lasts for a month or two, falls off. It looks like this group falls back and retools, redo their fishing lures and things of that nature before relaunching another one. I do think a tactic like that of keeping their things fresh, helps keep them in front of some of these other organization groups and keep them near the front. Net support rat, or remote access Trojan, is another example of all the different tools out there in the world that are a legitimate tool, but it's being used for nefarious purposes, and botnets are being built around these things. It gives threat actors an extra layer of obscurity when they're inside of a network. If someone who's looking through it sees net support and aren't aware that it's being used maliciously, they may think that's a legitimate tool. But this tool can be used to monitor devices, capture video, screenshots. It can modify registry files, install additional files or malicious payloads as needed. And it's become more and more abused and implicated in numerous cybercrime campaigns, really because it's very easy to use and it's very easy to deploy.
So when we talk about mitigations for and responses for botnet's actually just the communication between something installed on the system and the threat actor. So it can be used to send commands to particular malware to take a screenshot or dump some keylog information. There's lots of things they can do there. So some of the ways that we can help mitigate and respond to that is to leverage threat intelligence. There's a lot of open source intelligence on botnets and the IPs and domains and URLs that they use to communicate back and forth. So we can use that as an initial layer. Next generation firewalls and antivirus actually has some signature-based detection around the type of activity that botnets do, as well as their own threat intelligence layered in there to understand if an IP or another IOC is associated with a particular botnet. The last one here is a little bit more human-driven, which is threat hunting. And so this is connecting other things that are going on to those communications. So a lot of times, if we're looking into a malware, part of that malware's attack chain would be a botnet or command and control. And so that's a way for us to collect intelligence, grab those IOCs that are reaching out for commands or reaching out to download files, and using that to create alerts and potentially track down other things that are going on in the environment.
We move into the next section for exploits. Overall, we saw a 52% decrease in activity, which sounds very different from what we see here on the chart. But if you notice, the beginning of the quarter was extremely quiet compared to what we normally see. In Q1, we witnessed some of the largest brute forcing campaigns that we've witnessed since we've done this report. That activity stopped near the end of Q1 and beginning of Q2. The big spike you see at the end of the quarter is a lot of that brute forcing activity starting to kick back in. And so we're still working to attribute a lot of this information, but a lot of it's coming from those typical foreign countries that we see, mess with U.S. networks and things of that nature. So some things like geo-blocking can help, as well as also making sure you're not leaving any ports open to be brute forced in the first place. If you're not using those services, you shouldn't have them exposed, because these threat actors are actively looking for targets to brute force and try to kick the door in on. We look at some other things, removing that brute force activity. The top exploit still remains to be Apache's Log4j as far as seeing top witness typed of exploits. And when we look at all of our exploits in general as well, too, when we were looking at our Q data, one of the things that jumped out to us is that Apache products have now creeped over the 25% mark of really all witnessed exploits we've seen during Q2. So really, what this goes to show us here is, threat actors definitely like to get more bang for their buck. They're using products and attacking things that have a large market share, because very infrequently do we see these attacks really be targeted unless it's from a nation state actor or something of the nature where you have sort of intellectual property that they're interested in. Typically what we see from the ransomware gangs and attacks and things, they're opportunistic. And so when that brand new vulnerability gets announced, they're jumping onto it, they're creating their exploits and going at it right away. And so specifically when it comes to something like Apache or really any other big major numerous enterprise organizations use it. If you see that thing announced and you use it within your environment, you need to prioritize patching those vulnerabilities as soon as you can, because these threats are absolutely targeting them as soon as possible.
And for exploits and mitigation on this, and Josh touched on a little bit there, we have to make sure that we're patching our systems and getting ahead of that. We can't think of these threat actors as one single person or entity targeting this particular company. A lot of times these are scripts that are running just to check to see, hey, what's open for me to attack? Oh, here's some open ones. Go ahead and run this part of code and try to exploit it. And then if you get something, I'll send it over to a guy and he'll continue on to try to get a payload deployed. So the best thing we can do is not show up on that first list, right? Making sure that we're patching our systems as soon as possible. Yeah, you got to be the faster, and patch management is difficult, but the faster that you can get those systems patched, you're kind of ahead of everybody else. You're not the path of least resistance for attacker. And so that's the most important part. There's some other things that we have deployed or we can't have deployed in our organization, like firewalls that have IPS signatures, monitoring security news vendor and security bulletins. This is huge. You can't patch it if you don't know. So really keeping track of the different software vendors that you're using, looking out for any CVEs that they're posting, any security flaws in their code, so you can be ahead of that and know that the information's there. And then the last one here, I think Josh touched on a little bit, is disabled unused services. If it's a service that you're not using, go ahead and close it out and just make yourself less of a target, less surface area to be attacked. Which is always good. And then you can always end up with those devices that you don't know you have or you don't remember you had that are used for initial jump off point for an attacker in your systems.
And so one thing that we've added within our reports here now is an industry spotlight. And this particular quarter, we took a look at the financial services, and it really shouldn't come to any surprise that the financial services is highly targeted by factors. There is a ton of sensitive data, financial gain to be had if they are successfully attacked. And right now, the statistics indicate that in 2023, the average cost of a data breach for an organization is now up to $4.5 million. So unfortunately, we have seen a sharp increase in ransomware extortion publications against the financial industry. Comparing Q1 to Q2, that's up 40%. So a question that came up and we've included within this report, we want to cover during this presentation, is what does a typical ransomware attack actually look like? Jump on that in the next slide, but one thing I do want to point out on this slide too is these are some of the most common tactics, techniques, and procedures that are used against the financial industry. Please, if you have time, afterwards, get into our report. We do get much more depth when it comes to these different TTPs that are used against the financial industry. Jumping into the ransomware attack side of things, though, what does that look like? Well, one, as Justin had mentioned, the scripts, the discovery, they have to find their target. Generally, these ransomware gangs are out there just scanning. They don't pick a specific organization and say, that's who I'm going to ransomware attack today. What they do is they use tools like Shodan or scripts scanning the open internet for services that are exposed, and they gather up a list, and then they begin to work down through that list, trying different exploits against vulnerable software that's exposed until they eventually get their initial access. Once they've got themselves into the network, they have that target, and they've exploited it. Things like Clop ransomware and the Move It vulnerability, they can use that to get their initial access, or they can maybe launch a phishing attack that gets them into the door. Now that they're in the network, they've got to gain persistence. They've got to escalate their privileges. They've got their beachfront and they don't want to lose it. At this point, they're going to start creating new accounts within the network, schedule tasks, startup configurations, install additional payloads of malware. They don't want to lose their foothold into the door. While that's happening, they're going to begin to laterally move throughout the network looking for internal vulnerabilities or work to try to get that admin privileges so they can go ahead and get into these other systems, whether that be through remote desktop, file shares, the internal vulnerabilities to get as much digital real estate as they can possibly grab. Once they've done so, they're going to begin to evaluate the data they have access to, or they may say, we're going to take everything. And you may see some things like, compaction of different files using WinRAR, things of that nature. As they begin to consolidate this data, you'll start to see huge data transfers, sometimes during non-working hours. And once they've got everything off that they want to, they're going to begin to encrypt. The execution here happens. This is the most visible and most devastating part of the attack. This is when your end users begin to call and say, there's weird files. They can't get onto this stuff anymore. Their desktop has changed. They've lost access to servers. And the fallout begins at that point where incident response has to kick off. The organization now has to begin restoration efforts through backups. They have them available. They have to make the determination whether they're going to accept the loss of data. And then during all of this process, the organization's grinded to a standstill until they can restore these operations. Within the report, as I mentioned just a moment ago for the financial side too, really do get into a good bit of the TTPs that are involved with these different ransomware gangs when it comes to this particular ransomware attack. So please, if you do have time afterwards, if that's something that interests you, please crack open the report and take a look through that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Justin for our conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you for that walkthrough, Josh. It was really good. But I'm going to cover some of the recommendations here. There are some things that we can do, right? It is very scary to thought. I've been a part of many IRs and things like that where it's not a good day when you're ransomed. And so there's a few things that we should do in general to help against all these risks that we talked about today. Number one is educate your users often. And educate them on things that are prevalent, new approaches that our attackers are taking. Not all, phishing training is great, but giving users the understanding of a little bit deeper of how they may be exploited to gain a foothold into the network will definitely help them in at least being curious when they get something that may match a description that you taught them during the education phase. Taking a layered approach to security, there's no one security vendor, product, service that's going to protect you against everything. And so a layered approach is always recommended, using, EDR, using, threat hunting services, collecting threat intelligence, having a firewall in place. There's all kinds of things that we can do to kind of have a layered approach to security. Patch your applications. This is huge. The Move It vulnerability we talked about, Apache still being used to exploit. Path of least resistance is the way to think about it. And so if you can patch your systems to make it a little bit more difficult, the chances of you getting exploited by a 0-day that no one knows about are pretty low. And so most attacks are going to come from things that we know about, we just maybe weren't ahead of or aware of. And so patching your systems is very important. Updating your malware protection, making sure all your software is updated on that end. And then the last one here is segregating your high-risk devices. Every company knows where their crown jewels are. If you don't, you can do exercises to kind of figure out that and understand that. But having some segregation for that, some access control to those crown jewels to make sure that they're not lost or something doesn't happen to them is really important. So I'm a big believer in tabletop exercises where you ask the hard questions. What would happen if this, this device went down or this data was stolen. Response is also a good way, and this is a good way to learn how to respond to things, but it also bring up questions like, hey, maybe we should have an offsite backup of this thing, or maybe we should, add an extra layer of security to this, this particular segment of the network. These are all some really good things we can do to keep a layered approach to security and ultimately help protect our business.
We'll turn it back to Gina at this point.
Awesome. All right. Thank you both for a great discussion and sharing all that data. Like the guys said, if you want to dig more into that data, there's so much more in the actual report. If you click over to our website on that link I put in the chat box, you can download it for free. And there's a lot more meat there. This is just basically a top level review here in the webinar. So if anyone has any questions, it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Go ahead and type them into the Q&A. I do want to quickly mention our next webinar on September 14th. We'll be teaming up with our friends at Nuspire to share pen testing stories. It should be really interesting. So we're going to hear from both sides, both perspectives of the pen tester and the organization being tested. So I'll go ahead and share the link to that webinar if anyone is interested in signing up. All right, let's see, questions. All right, our first question is, roughly how much downtime does an organization face after a ransomware attack?
I can take that first one. That's a little bit of a loaded question in terms of how there's a lot of variables involved with it, and that's going to change depending on how prepared the organization is. Do you have backups available? Do you have a good incident response plan? As Justin, have you done tabletops to know these different variables, and how swift are people going to be to get things back up? But statistically, I read a report maybe a few weeks ago, and I want to say it was somewhere between 15, 20 days. So we're looking 2 to 3 weeks after a ransomware attack for the downtime. So unfortunately, that's an even bigger insult to injury to get all the way back up and running with the operational costs involved and the loss of man hours during that time period.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Josh. And then I see one more question here also on ransomware. How much does a ransomware operator typically ask for?
I can jump on that one too. So it can vary from organization to organization, as ransomware operators do a lot of research once they've pulled data from an attack before they actually go ahead and publish that onto their extortion website. They do look to see, do these organizations have cyber security insurance, things of that nature. But they do say right now that the average ransom for a large enterprise organization has been roughly about $5 million.
Any comments, Justin?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that. They're going to do the research to understand the costs or how much they can potentially get. It's always, kind of a two-pronged attack too, because you have the extortion part of it where they're posting the data. So there's reputation loss that could potentially come with that. There's some fallout on that end. So there's some costs to pay on that side, with the addition of getting back up for the ransomware, or just asking, having to pay the ransomware in order to get your data back because, we weren't properly prepared and so on and so forth. So, it's a huge loss for ransomware. It's definitely not something that's unrecoverable, but we want to do what we can to not be an easy target of some of these types of activities.
Thank you for that. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions at this time. We have about 1 minute left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. But if you do come up with any other questions, please email us at webinars@nuspire.com or contact us through our website at nuspire.com. be happy to route those questions to the appropriate department. Any closing thoughts from either of you, Josh or Justin?
No, just once again, thank you everybody for attending. Certainly appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to us. And I do hope you have a moment also to get into the report and take a look at there as well too. There's a lot of meat in there that we just don't have enough time to fully cover.
Yep, just same sentiment as Josh. Thanks for everyone for joining. We love coming out here and sharing this information with everyone, and look forward to any questions that you guys want to send over. And hope you enjoyed the report.
All right, on behalf of Nuspire and our presenters, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.